So what are we here for today? Here to learn more about what's happening in China, and you'll find what Tim has to say very interesting. But we're here also at the end of today. I really would like to have a discussion around what we see as a strategic direction for, as an industry, working towards exporting to China, and we get your involvement in a strategy, an industry strategy. I'll introduce Tim. So Tim, you might have read the blurb about Tim. I met him a couple of years ago when he brought a delegation, quite a powerful delegation from China to Australia, which probably was one of the starting points of what you've been working on, connecting the two markets. He has a long history in China. He went to University ANU in Canberra, ended up in China somehow, I don't know how. Has been involved in fashion retail, but more recently directly in the fashion trade business, I guess. It's easier to say. So Tim has a great passion for helping to connect Australian fashion into China. He's done a lot of work on developing the recipient end, and I would like us to really engage more and more with Tim and what he's doing, so that we can be we can feel that what I see is a need that's evolving. So, Tim, could you come and take over and?
Good afternoon, everybody. I know it's a Friday afternoon. I'm in between you and your weekend, so I hope I can keep you awake for the next hour or so and give you some refreshing information, and then we can have a good discussion. Just quickly, has anybody here been to China? Okay. And of those who've been, how many have done business in China? Okay, excellent. Just to give you a bit of information on myself and my fashion and retail industry credentials, I'm originally from Canberra, and I first spent time in China in 2001 as an exchange student, and really took a liking to the place, and after graduation moved back to Asia. I actually first spent 5 years in Tokyo, because at that time, this is 2004 to 2009, the China fashion industry was still a little bit mature. So I thought that camping out in Tokyo and learning how that business works in Japan, because it's a very advanced market, I could then learn a lot of things to take back to China. And I moved back to China in 2009 and joined Savills, which is a real estate company, and was consulting on their retail team, helping shopping mall developers to do the planning for hundreds and hundreds of shopping malls that were being built over the country. And then I played a role helping them connect to the luxury brands and doing luxury store leasing. And that's really where I got my fashion industry knowledge from. I would take the global heads of Louis Vuitton, Prada, Gucci, these types of brands around China, looking at new malls to open stores. And a lot of the exercise for them, which I'll talk about, was not just opening stores, but really building their brands in China. So it was about market entry, store openings, engaging with consumers, and the whole story. And that's really where I got my knowledge from. As I worked a lot with European brands, I saw a real need in the Australian design, fashion and retail community to understand more about China. Now, a lot of Australian brands have the big resources or the know-how to go into China with millions of dollars. And so I pitched a project to DFAT. Within DFAT, there's an Australia-China Council who have grant funding for cultural projects. So I pitched the idea of starting to do some fashion industries engagement between Australia and China, and they liked that idea. And that was when I first met Dave a few years ago. I brought a delegation from China Fashion Week down to Melbourne. We went to the Melbourne Fashion Festival. We did retail tours. We looked at a wool farm. We saw a sheep, which they loved. The next year I took Graham Lucy up from the Melbourne Fashion Festival and some designers. We went to China. We did the same thing there. And through these different activities, started testing the touch points in the market to see what are the opportunities for Australian retailers or fashion designers in China, and also the other way around. And through that, we really identified that there's still a large misunderstanding or knowledge gap in Australia about how China works. And so we put on the China Fashion and Retail Forum in Sydney in February. And Dave was a speaker at that, and we had Westfield, David Jones, the Australian Fashion Chamber, different people involved in the Australia-China fashion retail relationship. We brought down the editor and the editor-in-chief of Vogue China, Angelica Chong, who's very powerful and knowledgeable, and So through that we touched on 5 key pillars of the Australia-China retail trade. One was e-commerce, one was consumers, one was manufacturing and IP, the others was tourists. And so I'm going to touch on a bit of those things today. Now I realised when putting this presentation together that when I used to present to luxury brand CEOs it was really easy. I just said you open a big store in Beijing and Shanghai and Hong Kong, and you pump money into it and you build your brand up and then you open as many stores as you can. And that was pretty easy to do. Thinking about how to talk about China to the Australian market where brands are different sizes, you could be a fashion brand or you could even be a food and beverage retailer, and crossing that real broad degree of businesses looking at China is actually pretty tough. So my presentation today is quite general, but I welcome you to ask questions throughout, and we'll have a good question and answer session at the end. And on China, there's no question that's too silly to ask. Now, even myself, for example, yesterday I was flying from Sydney to Melbourne, and I got online and I bought a ticket to what I thought was Melbourne, and it was to Avalon. So that was a bit of a stuff up. Luckily, there was too much fog, and the plane went to Melbourne. So I was stoked, and the whole rest of the plane was really upset, but I didn't say anything. So I did a rookie mistake yesterday. So any questions at all, and if I'm using jargon that you don't understand, stick your hand up, and I'll clarify. All right. This is the wall of the Forbidden City in Beijing. It's actually an ad from Shanghai Tang. But this is quite relevant because this is the Chinese consumer that you're thinking of these days: young, hip, fashionable, and probably with a reasonable amount of money. So why are we talking about China at all? Really, it's because there's a squillion consumers up there, and we want to sell them all a T-shirt. This is a regular scene for me. I try not to take the subway home because it's a bit intense, but that's why we're talking about China, because there's a huge market, especially the middle class there, and their consumption power is growing, and their interest in global brands and global experiences is becoming very important. The other trick about China is a lot of times people ask me specific questions, and it all depends, because China's a real country of contrasts. You have, the Beijing CBD with big modern skyscrapers, and it looks quite nice. But then you've also got housing projects which go for thousands of, what seems like thousands of kilometres across the country, different levels of income, different living standards. You've got the young kind of hipster and fashionable set who are probably internationally minded, may speak English, may have studied overseas, know about brands, have disposable incomes for these types of things. Even better nowadays, you're starting to see the younger generations not just want to use brand name things. They're getting the confidence to wear non-branded things, or even quite funky shoes there. We still have a Louboutin bag, but besides that, there's no branded goods there at all, which is a stage that the Chinese consumers are arriving at. Then you also have people on a very, very low income base. This subway cleaner, 149 Kwai, that's probably less than 20 bucks. That may be his weekly income. So for him to think about buying some Beckham boxes, would be unfathomable for him. So when it comes to China, you're really talking about a real dichotomy of different things. You've got these brand new big malls popping up across the country. This one designed by Zaha Hadid. They deliberately used her so it would get attention. The mall itself is crap. They built the thing before they leased it, so it's empty inside and it's not in a convenient part of town, but it looks great from the outside. So,
is that the case through a lot of these malls through China? They're having a lot of trouble leasing? Because there's move-outs from luxury brands.
There's some malls that are still very strong, and there's an oversubscribed waiting list to get into them. There's then some which are not doing too well like this. So we're kind of breaking into thirds. A third are quite strong, a third could go either way, and a third are going to die. Again, that depends on the city, depends if it's a luxury mall or a mid-end mall. Whereas I used to take luxury brands around the country, and the issue around 2010, 2011 is the malls wanted the brands in so badly that they would throw money at them to build a store. So the brands didn't know how far it would go, and they kept opening and opening and opening. And now it's slowing down. Some of them have too many stores.
So the bricks and mortar sales are actually not there for a lot of the luxury brands, and the e-commerce is working better for them.
There's a shift, and I'll talk about that too, on what that shift is and how it happened, but the appetite for new stores is slowing.
Yeah, they're actually looking at how they can reinvent these large malls and what they can actually do with them, because they're white elephants, a lot of them.
And to some degree, the more fancy looking malls are the worst performers. I mean, again, we could do a whole hour or two just on malls. But now, even the mall has to think about what it's offering is, because just having a retail like Gucci and Zara is not enough. You've got to have a good mix of food and beverage, entertainment, why people come to the mall in the first place. And that's not just a China phenomenon, it's a global one. Retail-tainment is the new kind of word. You've got cathedrals to brands. The biggest Zegna store in the world. This Vuitton's actually closed now. It's now becoming a Victoria's Secret. So Zegna and Victoria's Secret together will be interesting. You've got these mega stores. You've got a few multi-brand, interesting stores. This one stocks specifically Chinese designers starting to pop up. Now, something very important to know about the Chinese market is department stores only act as landlords. They do not buy wholesale. So that wipes out a whole distribution channel for you. There are some multi-brand stores, such as the Lane Crawfords or Galeries Lafayette, that are there and do to some degree buy wholesale. But the department store multi-brand model, they will buy designers' collections. Basically, it doesn't exist. You've also got, things coming out of factories, fake stuff. I mean, this is right in downtown Beijing, opposite the biggest Uniqlo in the city, and you've got people selling out of the back of their cars. So it's really, a dichotomy on the way retail works. You've got big brands like Louis Vuitton. This was their, checkered collection a few years ago. Marc Jacobs, right before he left, selling in mega stores, while at the same time you have people taking their design and selling it in a little market. Obviously, it's probably not the same consumer. If you really want a Vuitton, you're going to buy Vuitton, but it just shows in terms of design or how the trends work and the actual purchasing. It happens in different avenues, and then also the same design gets put online for $20. So really, when we talk about the opening of China, the Olympics is really when post-Olympics is what we talk about. I mean, Vuitton's been in China for 20 years, Zegna's been in China for 20 years, so it's not like all of these brands poured in, but really post-Olympics is where China was open for business, and suddenly the brands said, oh, okay, there's money to be made, and they all started pouring in. And I was part of that real store growth from 2010 to 2015 as they all did so. So they're all pouring in. I mean, these photos are luxury, but the fast fashions are doing it too. I recall, was it last year or perhaps the year before, the first H&M in Melbourne opened. And I'd already been to 40 H&M store openings in China. So China is, some people still think it is a bit backwards, but it's actually, in many fronts, already way ahead of many other markets. So big stores, and the big stores were to build the brand. Really, you had to get out there and grab attention, and one of the other problems was developers were putting so much money to the brands to build the store, Prada, you come and we'll pay for the store and you just open, because if you come, everyone will come. So Prada would say, sure, I'm going to open a first floor store, because that's more efficient than a 2-story store, but I want a 3-story facade to show my brand. And then Gucci would say, well, Prada's getting one, so I want 4 stories, and would actually have to put these in the contracts of whose facade can be bigger than whose. That's stopped a little bit now, but it got a bit carried away for a while. And for these big brands, the general strategy was pretty simple. You open in the big first 2 cities, first with flagships, so Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, Shenzhen, well, Shenzhen not so much, but Guangzhou, Hong Kong, to get your attention. Then you start spreading out across the country. So you start to build up a store network, all the way from big 2,000 square meter flagships through to brands like Coach or Michael Kors, and some of the smaller ones, still just luxury, could could do counters in department stores, but you just spread out across the country. And so you get brands like Vuitton, which has about 40 stores across the country. There's other brands with more. Some brands like Chanel, Hermes deliberately decided not to go that fast with stores. Hermes had a policy of 1 store a year for a while, and that was to really remain exclusive. And through remaining exclusive, they've really kept their brand equity. Okay, so this is what the stores look like, and again, you know, when you're competing with a brand like this, it can be a bit daunting. You're like, oh God, you know, I'm a small brand, forget China. But you've got to understand that these stores are out there, but there's still a place for all brands in the market. Then it comes down to more of the science of how you do that and get into your consumer. And again, not all of these stores perform well. Some of them are just free advertising and then brand building exercises. That's the one I showed before. This one's now closed. A lot of them, you know, they're big. And also, you know, as that opens stores, they go in with big marketing campaigns, big events. This is Fan Bingbing. She's arguably China's most favourite celebrity / socialite / actor / singer / everything. Triple threat, quadruple threat. So when they opened the store, they do this kind of engagement. And it was the same for brand after brand. Actually, it was a great time to live through. Some of the parties were pretty good. This is the Giorgio Armani event in Beijing. Again, not being in China at that time, you know, if I was trying to do this anywhere else in the world, it wouldn't have worked. So it was a lot about the right time and right place. Fashion show after fashion show, event after event. So all brand building, supporting the whole market entry strategy. Even taxis magazines would talk about luxury bags. Everywhere you went, it seemed. So what happened is all these brands kind of poured in, and you can see from here, there's, you know, even in that one shot, which is downtown Shanghai, this is Gucci's 5-story facade. The store's only 2 floors, I think. But it got very crowded very quickly. And to stand out more, you had to either do more marketing or special events. And so it didn't take long before it got pretty competitive. And back then, and this has changed now, you know, people would just go for logo because the consumer wasn't educated. So, oh, that store's the biggest one, that must be the most expensive brand, I'll just go and buy that. Whereas now they're getting to the stage of, okay, I'm confident in my decision purchases as a consumer. I don't just get a brand for its logos. So around 2013, things had really been growing quickly. I mean, China had been growing at 10% for almost 3 decades. Things were starting to slow down, and the new government, which is President Xi Jinping, came in 2012. It wasn't a sudden market shift, but several things happened to really disrupt the market. The first one, that the government put into place an anti-corruption drive. Now, there had been a large amount of, I mean, China is a corrupt country, and there's been a lot of corruption for thousands of years. It's part of their culture. So things were getting quite bad, and the government came in to clamp down on this. And a big part of corruption and culture in China is gift giving for business or for facilitating favours. And gifts, a lot of gifting was of luxury goods and fashion products. So when the anti-corruption drive came in, it started to worry people who stopped spending on these products. And these are all government officials who would go to government meetings, and there was media outside, and people started to pay attention that these government officials are actually, you know, in China, which is theoretically a communist country, and people are, you know, meant to not be up to this kind of behaviour on government salaries, spending this much is on bags. So they call it a witch hunt, where the general public would get online and start finding out how much all these government officials were spending on their expensive products. And there was a great public backlash, and this was also contributing to anti-corruption. And this is one of the most famous stories about it. This government official, Yang Dacai, his name is, there was a photo, I think this is the original one, where someone realised he was wearing a luxury watch. And he was a government official, so his salary, he shouldn't have been able to afford that. And so the netizens went on a witch hunt online and found these 11 other photos of him with different luxury watches. And so he's now in jail. And this isn't the only story, but it's a perfect example of how suddenly people didn't want to wear luxury watches anymore, or carry luxury handbags. So it really took the edge off the luxury market. Another thing that happened at the same time, it wasn't just anti-corruption, but around the same time, several countries eased visa restrictions to Chinese. The US issued 10-year visas, the UK opened up visas, so Chinese started traveling more and buying more overseas. If you look at the sales to Chinese in China, they're slowing. If you look at sales to Chinese outside of China, they're still growing. And there's a large luxury tax on goods in China, up to 17 to 20%. So if you're traveling to London anyway, or now a lot of spending in Japan, you can actually offset the cost of your ticket for the purchases you get outside China. The other thing that happened around the time was a lot of, the e-commerce was starting to get more ripe, and so some spending was going online, and so that's what I call the perfect storm. But still, that didn't totally stop people's interest in fashion. It just stopped the more flashy side of the logos and the brands. And you can see this is a shot of a front row of a fashion show, and these aren't government officials, so. Although some may be, you never know. But it's very, maybe that's probably a branded watch there or two. But otherwise, it's just young, fashionable kids. And they probably have their own job where they get some money off. But this is also important. With the single child policy, which is now being cancelled, you can have 2 children. But a lot of these single children were also getting money from mum and dad, and both sets of grandparents. So you effectively have 7 channels of income, which gives you lots of play money. You may still live at home, and so whereas a young person in Australia probably has to survive off their own income and how they have a house and maybe a mortgage and car and all these different things. In China, a lot of the young people's money can just go on fashion and having fun. So this is, and this is why there's still a market, and these are especially in fashion, these are the kind of people that you want to target. Now, obviously, as a brand or retailer, you have to communicate with your customer, and the internet ecosystem in China is completely different to the rest of the world. Facebook doesn't work, Google doesn't work. The reason that the government says it, they've blocked those sites is because censorship. They don't want crowds gathering. They don't want dissent. The other reason they've done it is that it's basically protectionist policy. By blocking the world's biggest internet companies from operating in Beijing, they've given their own internet companies a chance to grow up, and they're now becoming dominant players in the world, not just China.
Tim, can I ask, is that Instagram?
Instagram was okay until the Hong Kong umbrella protest that happened about 18 months ago, and then Instagram got shut off. Oh. If you have a VPN, it's a program which basically, they put a wall in the internet. It's a tunnel under the wall, so I can get on Facebook and everything. It just makes it really inconvenient, and Chinese don't care because they have their own websites. So Amazon is in China. I'll have a graph in a minute. Amazon, considering it's the biggest, probably global e-commerce website, they have 2% share of the China market. The main sites are Taobao, Tmall, which are Alibaba sites, JD.com, and I'll talk a bit more about those. YouTube is blocked, Facebook is blocked, Twitter is blocked, so we use other versions. And the most popular and most exciting one at the moment is WeChat. So just for example, I did a search for the term Australian fashion into Google and got these images back. Not only does Google separate into different categories, but also, a lot of those images are pretty, they're designer brands there. You can tell from the aesthetic that it's probably photos from Designers Collection or Australian Fashion Week, these different things. In comparison, in Mandarin, typing in Australian fashion into Baidu is the Chinese search engine, you get a really mixed bag of stuff. So thinking from the consumer point of view, if I'm in China and I wonder what an Australian fashion brand is, well, the first thing you get is boxing kangaroos. And Baidu's algorithms, the way they rank search results, is different to Google, and you can pay to get ranked differently, and that's that's a different issue. But this is just an example to show how the information you get about brands is different depending on what tool you use. E-commerce, this has been really staggering growth in e-commerce across the last few years. And a lot of that came when the smartphone arrived. China has effectively leapfrogged the desktop computer era and now has, I think, the highest penetration of smartphones in the world. Something like 60%, very high penetration. Young people just do not use computers. It's all mobile. So again, if you want to build a website, you're building for mobile first. You don't build a desktop computer and hope it shrinks to mobile. You build your mobile site first. The Chinese shop online way more than everybody else, and that's still growing pretty quickly. And if you want stats on, I mean, this is an old survey, this is 2011 now, but it's still, the results are very similar. Now, just looking at e-commerce, it gets, again, there's this whole ecosystem of e-commerce brands out there. Some are vertical, some are horizontal. If you want to sell baby products, go on Red Baby or choose a specific site, but there are dominant ones. The dominant one for B2C is Tmall and JD, and JD is not even on here. The other one, which is very significant, is Taobao, which is more of a C2C, consumer to consumer, bazaar. Actually, JD is that one, it's not been acquired. So there are some sites still trying to push the high end and more fashion stuff like Seoul. We've got Amazon trying to push their stuff too. And it was funny, I was walking through a park the other day in Beijing, and this is just another thing that highlights to me the change in the consumer. These types of cameras where you've got these super telephoto lenses. There was a gang of elderly gentlemen kind of hiding out in the bushes with these vests with lenses in them, and they were bird watching. Bird watching in the park in Beijing, and all of them had, I swear they were $10,000 cameras, because now they had some money and this was their hobby. And so whether it's a camera or other consumer product, these things are now all pretty, as lifestyle and hobbies come in China, then all these products start to resonate more. This is Yoox, which is now the Yoox Net-a-Porter group. This is their Chinese side for some of the more really hip brands. Yoox and Net-a-Porter have not done great business in China to date. Part of that issue is the way goods are shipped into China and how they cross through Chinese customs, because there's meant to be a luxury tax on these high-end products. If it's being shipped from overseas, then it's basically diverting customs. So customs were stopping some orders at the border, and consumers weren't getting them. So what these websites had to do, they had to do a merchandising, decide what the Chinese might want, and send all that stuff to China through customs, land it in China, and then dispatch it off, which meant they were having to make decisions on sending stuff into China. Once something's in China, you don't want to take it back out again, because then there's all these customs duties and excises, which made it more complicated for them. Now this is the market share. Again, this is it's 2 years old, but it's still pretty much like this. This is the market share of the big e-commerce platforms in China. So Tmall by far has half of the share, followed by JD, and then everyone else kind of breaks it up. Amazon 2% share, which is absolutely nothing. Interestingly enough, the way Tmall was born essentially was a competitor to eBay. So eBay went into China many years ago, and Alibaba said, "Well, we're not letting these foreigners in there, so let's build our own site to compete with them." And eBay completely lost, and they exited the market. So for foreign internet companies going to China is pretty tough. And these are the kind of things they do. They're very good at understanding their local consumers. They go wallet crazy one day. These days, if you take this away, almost, I'd say a large percentage, 80% even, of outdoor advertising, especially in downtown cities, it's just the e-commerce companies. They're so big now. Alibaba globally is in the top 5 companies with market capitalization, in the world. So these are really cashed up, big companies. So it's also important to understand about China and e-commerce companies such as Alibaba is their entire ecosystems. It's not just one e-commerce website, but they have an inbuilt payment system. They now own travel companies, so if you're traveling, you can order first on the things you want to buy. It's delivered to you back home. They now do financing. They have, different social networks. It's all meshed together, and the consumers operate multiple functions of their lifestyle all within these ecosystems. This is Woolworths' own site on Tmall. This is actually Tmall Global. Tmall HK meaning Hong Kong, which is somewhat separate from the Tmall China site. And again, that's got to do with how items cross the border and tax is paid on things. What's interesting to see here is that Woolworths are only selling their own private label stuff because they don't have the rights to sell all their other products in China yet. Now they may like to, but that's going to be very complicated for them because they're going to have to go brand by brand by brand by brand and get the rights to China. So I'm not sure have many of you heard of WeChat? Okay. I mean, WeChat really now is one of the world's leading mobile apps, 600 million users. And it's not just a social network where you post photos like the Facebook feed or you talk to your friends, but you can do shopping through it, you can order a taxi through it, you can share money, pay for bills. I mean, these days if I go to a cafe, I hardly take cash in me in China, I just use WeChat to pay. The really interesting thing that is already happening in China but can start to happen around the world is once you let someone pay for your product with WeChat Pay, you're then getting a communication channel with them. So say they come to your store in Melbourne, they buy something, they pay for it with WeChat Pay. Then they go back to China, you can still send them messages and say, hey, you bought that with us here, if you still like it, we can send you more in China. And that's really the holy grail is getting them when they're at home. All this way that the mobile apps and the e-commerce systems, all that works in China is referred to as O2O, online to offline. It's a term which is pretty specific to China, but basically everyone's entire lifestyle can now be run through the mobiles and all the related apps. And actually Facebook is copying WeChat, trying to catch up. Facebook Messenger, which I haven't used, but understand was basically launched to copy WeChat. So I presume that everybody knows what omnichannel retail is. Anyone doesn't? Okay, so just to go quickly, so single channel is where you have one way to communicate with your consumer, such as a store. Multi-channel is where you have an e-commerce website and a store and maybe a catalogue, but they're separate channels. And omnichannel is where all those channels are connected. So I could buy something online and it's delivered to the store where I pick it up, or if I bought something online and it's the wrong colour, I can take it to the store and change it. So O2O, which I was just talking about, the closest thing in Western retail is omnichannel. But I think O2O in the China context is a bit more. It's much more intertwined, but basically what you're doing is you're putting the consumer in the middle of everything, where it's all connected, and the power of the mobile phone lets them to do lots of different things, whether it's marketing or sharing things socially or purchasing or going to stores. Basically, the Chinese urbanizing very quickly, and China's still building lots and lots of new buildings and new cities. So basically they're building the cities of the future, and they're starting to put these technologies into them. So they're going to have the most advanced, what we call smart cities, other than most other countries who can't keep up with the pace of building at the moment. But still, we get situations like where this is how things are delivered in the big cities. This is Amazon delivery. And these are the guys who are low-income earners, who are on a low wage, but who can get through traffic on the scooter, and that's how things get delivered quickly in China, in the cities. Usually if I order something off the big sites, a case of Penfolds wine or something, within half a day, 3 hours, it can be at my home. which is starting to cause another problem. These are all the e-commerce delivery vehicles, is that now they're starting to clog up the streets. This is a big mall in Beijing. So now they're, another social problem comes out of e-commerce. And none of these vehicles are actually registered, and the guys who drive them don't have driver's licenses, but they drive on the main road. I've seen, once I saw one kind of on fire, because they're all electric and batteries. But this is what's fun about it, it's a bit chaotic. But things, this is facilitating the whole commerce and retail system. And so this is really interesting.
Sorting it out, God.
So it was, e-commerce started getting so crazy that a lot of people, because then at work during the day, they would just get orders sent to their workplace. And so you'd get the delivery guys walking into the offices, and you start getting big piles of stuff stacking up in reception. So some offices took a different way. Some offices redesigned their reception areas to have an e-commerce storage facility, but some just said, right, no more e-commerce orders. We'd like you to concentrate on work. So what happens? This guy's, just off here, there's a big office building. He's obviously sorted out everyone in the building, so he puts them all out and he just starts calling. Down the street, come get your order. Down the street, come get your order. Down the street, come get your order. He's got 100 there, and this is happening at every building in the city all day in hundreds of cities across China. So yeah, this is a dispatch centre, and he's probably, he's a low-income earner, but all the people coming down to buy their things are all in the middle class. So a little bit on Australian brands in China. And one of the things, which came out of the Fashion Forum, and Dave and I have talked about, is if you're an Australian brand, what is it that you're selling to China? What's your unique selling proposition? For fashion, that's actually quite difficult. And something we're going to work on as an industry level to try and identify. Food and beverage is doing a great job at selling itself because it's chemical free. If you buy, there was a baby milk formula scandal in China where children died because there was melamine in the milk powder. So if you're a parent, are you going to want Chinese milk powder? Hell no. So Australia and New Zealand and other countries, milk powder, and that started the whole trend of, especially for children, we need foreign stuff, it's safer. Even Australian education sells itself quite well because we don't have guns in schools. But Australian fashion, what does it stand for? Is it Australian designed? If so, if that's your selling point, great, but what is Australian design? Are you selling a lifestyle? Is it made in Australia? If you're selling made in Australia and you get 10,000 orders in China, can you keep up? No. So suddenly when you're looking at a brand going into China, you've got to start thinking of what is it that you want to be selling. And also then that comes down to your distributions and how you're connecting with the consumer a little bit. So the way the big luxury brands or the Zara's and they do it is direct operated stores, which I would say no Australian brands are ready to do. Oraton does a little bit, but basically it's too expensive to do. So you can do e-commerce, but even e-commerce on its own is hard because you can't just set up the window. Once the way Chinese buy online is they might want to chat to you first. So 24 hours a day, suddenly you're having to do, chat in Mandarin. And if you can do that on your own, great, but you probably can't. So then you'll need an agency to do that. You'll need an agency for your logistics. So the distribution can also get pretty, not complicated, but there's multiple steps, and each step will need a partner, and then they get a piece of the pie of your getting your product to the consumer. Plus, we can now tack on, which I'll talk about in a little bit as well, is the suitcase traders. So this is an example of one Australian fashion brand that actually is in China. It's this out of Adelaide Australian Fashion Labels. It's one company who, within their one company, they have 7 different designer labels. They've set up a small office in Shanghai, less than 5 people, but they have a physical presence there and they're going about getting that into stores themselves. Conversations I've had this week also with other brands have highlighted the importance of, especially if you're a fashion brand, also having presence in other markets such as the US or UK before you then go to China. Because if you've managed to get on a celebrity, in the US, you can then bounce off that into China because you've already got some global marketing collateral. If you're just a small South Australian company, then you're like, here we are, China. It's tougher for you. Also mentally, for a business to get their head around being an international company, China is a very hard first step. So if you're already in one other market, even if it's New Zealand, you probably you're a bit more mentally ready for China. Again, I did a search on, this is JD.com. I did a search, this is just a search for Australia, so what's come up, some different categories, but the first thing it's showing to me is Australian travel books. Of course, if you change the search a little bit for Australian health, and you get all the Blackmores and the Swiss and these kinds of brands coming up. Interestingly enough, these brands aren't doing well off China because they went to China. They're doing well because the Chinese discovered them and started taking them to China. And then they wake up, okay, well, we better do something in China. And these companies are in the ASX 200, so these are big companies, and they're still discovering China. This is a search for the term Australian fashion. Now, there's different things you can take away from this. One thing that tells me, is it's the algorithms from this company, JD.com, which are going to decide what they show in this search. But maybe that's just what their customers are looking for. Maybe it's mums who just want a non-Chinese branded shoe for the kids, or gumboots or something. And with more analytics and discovery, we could go deeper on that. But this was just a top-level example. So quite interesting, I did all these searches on Taobao as well. And Taobao, it's important to distinguish what's different between Taobao and Tmall, which are both Alibaba sites. So Taobao is a free-for-all, more like a bazaar, where anyone can open their own store. I could open a Taobao store, and I could sell my second-hand clothes on there, or I could sell anything I wanted. So what you get on Taobao is you get manufacturers, you get people who own factories, people who are distributors. You get a complete mixed bunch selling anything they want to. And this is where all the fakes and the copies are on. So one thing I always recommend brands to do is get on Taobao and search for your brand. Now, if your brand is on there, but you're not officially distributing in China, it's a worry, because either things are coming out of the factory, or maybe a suitcase trader is buying your stuff in Australia and selling it with a margin on top, but at least you're making the sale. I would say it's almost more worrying if you're not on Taobao, because it means you have zero market recognition in China at all. And you have to start from zero. So it's almost a benchmark. Wait till you're on Taobao and then go into China. So I thought this was really interesting because, if you search for Australian swimwear, nothing comes up really. But if you search for the brand, Triangle, then a lot came up, showing me that Chinese are interested in the brand more than where the brand is from, especially for Australia. So all this stuff, Triangle I don't believe has official distribution. So all this stuff is grey market, where students or someone's buying it in Australia or getting it offline and reselling it into China. And this is a multi-billion-dollar industry now, the grey market sellers, or what we call the suitcase traders. And when you hear of on the news, people are buying out Australian supermarkets from milk powder, it's not mums coming down, it's the suitcase traders who are buying lots and lots at a time, putting their own margin on it and putting it on Taobao. Tmall, I should explain that as well. Tmall is also Alibaba's site. So Alibaba gets a lot of negative stuff, as they should, for counterfeit and fake stuff. And that's all on their Taobao site. Tmall, everything has to be officially trademarked, or you have to be the official distributor, checked through certification that you have the rights to distribute that product in China. So as a brand, you want to be on Tmall. You don't want to be on Taobao. Now, I think, again, something that's fundamental to me for connecting with the Chinese consumer is not just going to China. It's getting the Chinese coming here as well. And I think for most Australian brands, short to medium term, it's actually the bigger and much easier opportunity is either to attract the Chinese tourist or the Chinese students or the Chinese population that are here already. And if you can build your brand with them, they will start to take it back to China and do your marketing and messaging for you. Now, a lot of Chinese tour groups look like this, and they swarm into Macquarie's chair, or maybe Flinders Street Station, and they all take their photos and then go away, which can be a bit imposing, but they spend money. Tour group, the trend of tour groups is shifting away from tour groups to more individual travel. Some will be maybe a young couple traveling, they may have a baby, or they may bring their parents as well. Chinese travel a lot as the children and their parents. So it could be a group of 5 or even a group of 7, both sets of parents coming. Chinese, when they travel, they research a lot before they travel. We were looking at the Baidu search results for the term Sydney, and there's a spike in November, which is 2 months in ahead of Chinese New Year. So they start to do their shopping planning very early. So if you're a brand and you want to do marketing, you want to buy some media in China, to get the tourists coming, you work backwards. Okay, we do it in December or November. If you do it in February when it's Chinese New Year, it's already too late. These are all Hong Kong stores. It was the same the other day, and not quite a long line, but it was a line the other day in Sydney outside Gucci. I mean, the brands do it deliberately. They build hype, so they limit how many people get in. But interestingly enough, Hong Kong is really suffering now. Chinese tourists aren't going there so much. So Hong Kong's in a bit of trouble. I just pulled this off Tourism Australia's website, but the numbers, both in terms of spending, this is already outdated, so 840,000, there was 1 million Chinese visitors to Australia last year, and it's going to grow 10 to 20% year on year. There's not enough flights coming. In fact, Hainan Airlines is about to purchase 20% of Virgin Australia, and that's also about getting more people down here, using Hainan Island as another hub for connecting to Australia. So yeah, the money that's coming from Chinese tourists is going to be phenomenal. So what are the fashion products they're buying when they're here? Again, they're probably not going to Oxford Street or the little hip boutiques, and that's something we're working on as well. And in Tourism Australia, is there a way to get the Chinese out to more of the designer stores? But they're probably coming to buy this kind of stuff, whether it's for themselves or as gifts for other people. And this particular group is selling made in Australia. UGG, the brand, is not even Australian owned anymore, but they still push kind of the Australian angle a little bit. So these are the kind of things that Chinese, when they think Australian fashion or Australian fashion products, this is what they think of.
How important is the Australian made symbol to?
I don't think it's important at all. Food and beverage, yes, because that's, we want the milk powder, that's Australia because that's clean, it's safe. But I don't think in fashion it's so relevant.
There's a lot of retail stores that actually, that's a big selling point because the Chinese won't buy a made in China brand.
Gucci's made in China.
Yeah,
so,
but there's a lot of, like from people that have boutiques in Melbourne and things like that I deal with on a day-to-day basis.
Right.
It's very big with the Chinese to ask where does the product come from. If it's made in China, they don't touch it.
Interesting.
Maybe in China they buy China.
My feeling is there's probably a price differential where once it's a premium product and I'll pay a few $100 for this, it matters where it's made. Where if it's a cheaper product, if they like the design.
Yeah.
But that's an interesting.
Because if you say it's made in Italy, they go fine. If it's made in China, no, they don't touch it.
Right. Interesting that that's happening in Australia. Yeah. It'd be interesting to know if they're actually tourists or they're Chinese living here who may then be putting it on Taobao to resell, because there's partly also a different mentality between those two types of consumers.
Is that considered an illegal activity? Technically?
Yes, because they're avoiding Chinese taxes.
Yeah. And so will it ever be rented out?
So the government is trying to regulate it, but it's very, very difficult. So one of the ways they do it, and they do it sporadically, and it's not across the country, but a few weeks ago, everyone coming through Shanghai's airport had to, their whole suitcase was inspected by customs, and you either pay tax on the stuff you're bringing in, and a lot of people didn't. So they just literally, there were piles of cosmetics in the Shanghai airport, just like that.
Because my desktop research shows me that a huge percentage is this grey sales.
I looked at the figures from 2013 last night, 16 billion Australian dollars.
Yeah. And that's really, really hard to navigate.
If you think of all the ports in China, all the flights coming in, it's so much it's impossible to stop. But they're trying, they're starting to implement it. The brands are lobbying the government to stop.
Because it's quite a different concept to fake items.
Yes.
That's almost kind of Mickey Mouse and interesting.
Yeah.
But this is a very different, kettle of fish.
Yeah.
It's true commercial.
Yeah. Again, you know, if you're selling your product, you should still be happy, but you're missing your margin. So then it depends.
Well, you shouldn't be happy because they're taking your brand and doing with it and putting it where.
True, losing brand control. So interestingly, some brands now are actually willing to work with these grey market sellers. Saying, look, we'll give it to you. We'll give you our own messaging. You can put all that on WeChat, and so we'll help you with your communication.
Well, it's the only way to go. They're happy to join in.
Exactly. This was in just down in Sydney last night, actually. I just took a photo of it because it was funny. You could buy it there, or they can deliver it to you. So they're specialised, they do door-to-door, and it's quick delivery, 10 days to 2 weeks. Anything you want. Again, I didn't ask how they got it in. And you know, if you're more interested in the tourism side of things, Tourism Australia's got some good info online. People aren't coming to Australia specifically for shopping, but of course they'll shop when they're here. They're coming to Australia more for the attractions, the beauty and nature. So if you can tie shopping into that, give them an experience, build a lifestyle, you know, Australian lifestyle is great. You could, you know, maybe have some products that go with that. This can help in the way you market to tourists. I think I'm talking a bit over, so I'm going to start going a little bit faster, so we have lots of time for Q&A. Again, these are the things Australia's good at, is experiences and outdoors, and these are, you know, in Beijing I'd have to travel hundreds of kilometres to see a scene like that, where I could probably drive 5 minutes down the road and find a big oval or something, or down to the beach. So these are the things that we don't have up there, which are highly desirable. Look, China can be a bit big and scary and complicated, but it doesn't mean you can't take on that market. What it does mean is you shouldn't think, I'm going to set up a Chinese e-commerce store and I'm going to be making lots of money really quick. In fact, I was talking to a very successful Australian retailer this morning who's just starting to enter China after looking at the market for 5 years. They've done Hong Kong first, they've done Singapore, they found a partner, now they're talking to a few, and they're going into China, and they're very successful in retail that you would all know. So they're taking the time to get it right, and I think that's what you've got to do in China. It's good to go up, get feet on the ground, understand what the market is, even do a market study, understand where you might fit in the market, search for your brand on Taobao, start to think about China. In fact, there's some more sites here where there's lots of great information. This is a site I used to write, that's my old blog. I haven't written for a while, but there's still some relevant info on there. Business of Fashion wrote about China all the time. Jing Daily is purely China focused. For the e-commerce stats, China Internet Watch, Tech Note is about the e-commerce companies. China Law Blog will probably scare you off China forever. They talk about IP protection. China's a first to file country, meaning that so even New Balance doesn't own the trademark for New Balance in China, because some Chinese guy licensed it first 10 years ago. So again, you've got to think, if I want to go into China, maybe I want to go in 2 years' time, maybe I should trademark my brand now. Maybe somebody already has, so what does that mean? So these are good sources of information. If you're serious about China, you've just got to start thinking about it and planning. China doesn't happen really quickly. Yeah, that's it actually.